Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for clicking on this Rank the Movies video. It looks a little different. This is kind of the way I've live streamed in the past because I'm going to be putting some things up over here for what I'm talking about this week for Franchise Month. That's right. Last week we talked about Shrek. I'm going to be really all over the place with my hands. Last week we talked about Shrek. This week I'm talking about a horror franchise I somehow missed when I did that big horror franchise month way back in October of 2020. Um, so I'm going to write that wrong, and I'm going to write that wrong right now by talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street. The Nightmare on Elm Street franchise probably should have added an image to show up over there of the actual Nightmare on Elm Street, but I forgot. It's not the only thing I forgot while working on this video. So, yeah, we're talking Nightmare on Elm Street. It's the one I didn't do. I've done Halloween. I've done Friday the 13th. I've done Chucky. I've done Scream and Final Destination and The Purge. Um, but yeah, I have not talked about Nightmare on Elm Street because it's one of my least favorite horror franchises. I like it. It's like the bottom of the I'll still watch these movies horror franchises. So obviously, because we're doing it the way I have in the past, that means it's shark time. Uh, Obviously, the movies will be rated like they have been in every other horror movie franchise I've done, in either uh, good, average, or bad. And we'll see how this franchise all matches up when we're all said and done. I'll admit when I said that's not the right direction. When I said I did miss, this wasn't putting up a logo wasn't the only thing I didn't do for this video. I did miss one of the movies on the chart. I will talk about it, but I missed it, and I'll put it on the chart once. It won't be physically on the chart, but eventually it will be. I'll tell you where it goes. All right, so of course we have A Nightmare on Elm Street. This is the classic movie made by Wes Craven about a group of teens who find themselves haunted by a razor-fingered demon in their dreams, Freddy Krueger. And yeah, it's the original. We have Nancy Thomas trying to figure it out, and actually does this great thing where Nancy isn't seen as our initial protagonist. It's actually one of her friends who is also the first victim. So it's really cool because you have this established character who you think is our protagonist. You think they're the one we're going to follow through the story, and then after they introduce the nightmares and they say, "Oh yeah, this is happening," they are swiftly murdered by Freddy, and we then switch over to Nancy, who becomes the protagonist of this movie and one of the most long running protagonists of this series. Um, it's a decent movie. I like Nightmare on Elm Street. The first one is a good movie. It was very well made. Wes Craven put a lot of love into this movie because it was his idea. He wanted to people die in their sleep. What are they dreaming about that causes them to die in their sleep? And that is where A Nightmare on Elm Street came from. It's where it started. It's where it bore its first minutes of an idea, and it spawned this huge franchise of movies with Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger, except for the remake, which we'll get to. It's on here. That's not the one I forgot. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting movie. It's got that great death where Johnny Depp is pulled into the bed, um, and the spurt of blood comes up. It is a cool moment. It's got a lot of that. It's got a lot of good moments, and it's a very rewatchable movie. Where does it fall on my chart? Well, let's take a look. It's average. I talked it up a lot, but I decided to go with average on it because again, um, yeah, there's a standard of how I feel with all the other horror movies. I even talked about they're kind of all weighted together when I do this, and the original Nightmare on Elm Street is average, which is weird because normally the first installment is always listed as good in these rankings, but for this one I set it as average um, just because that's how I feel. It is a good movie. It is one of the better movies of this franchise. I don't have a final ranking on here either. Should have made that slide. So hopefully I'll be able to kick one out when we get that far. Next up is, of course, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. This is Freddy's Revenge. Robert Englund came back. Apparently, there was a time where they didn't want to pay Robert Englund. They thought they could do it without him, and then they realized, oh shit, we need Robert Englund for this movie. We follow a male protagonist who moves into Nancy Thompson's old house, finds her diary, reads about Freddy, and he kind of starts to get possessed by Freddy. This is a weirder one because it's not all about dreams. It's about Freddy taking over and possessing this new person and possessing his body and actually exiting into the real world through his body. So it's a definitely weirder Nightmare on Elm Street movie because it does pull away from what was set and what the rest of the movies would do. I mean, obviously this one hasn't brought in the witty, witty Freddy, which honestly, I do like. A lot of people don't like that fact of Freddy nowadays, but I've always liked it. That's one of the reasons I have a rewatch value for these movies. Is Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger and doing the quips and doing all that? That's part of it. This Freddy still isn't there yet. Um, yeah, there's some cool moments like when Freddy walks out of the kid. I'm not going to touch base on the underlying things of this movie and how it looked at now. I'm looking at it just as a movie. All that other stuff, I just really, really isn't important for what I'm doing because it's how is it as a horror movie? How is it as a Nightmare on Elm Street movie weighted against the first one and all the rest and how I feel about them? And honestly, it ranks bad. I always dread watching this one. It's not one, I get happy, like, I'm going to rewatch The Nightmare on Elm Street. The minute I get to the second one, I'm like, do I really want to keep watching this franchise? Like, and that's a personal feeling. Again, it has nothing to do with any of the overtones the movie has that have become more popular in people's discussions of it. It's simply, I just don't care for it. I just don't think it's a good movie. That brings us to Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. This is considered the best movie, and I kind of agree. I'm in that camp. I know, again, people are not like, well, it's not the best. It's blah, blah, whatever. This is where we start to get that more comical Freddy, the welcome to primetime bitch, and he shoves the girl's head into a TV. That's here. But basically, we get Nancy Thompson back. She is back as our secondary protagonist to Patricia Arquette, sister of David from the Scream franchise. Basically, the last of the Elm Street children are now sent to Weston Hills for their own safety to be, worked with so that Freddy, to make them forget about Freddy, basically, because Freddy works on memory. You have to remember Freddy for Freddy to get you. Um, but the last of them are sent to Weston Hills. Nancy is now a psychiatrist who is also working at Weston Hills with the last of the Elm Street kids as Freddy begins to pluck them off one on one. This is also the really iconic one of the kid being turned into a marionette through his tendons and stuff and then being dropped off of a bell tower. This has got a lot of iconic kills for the series in this movie. And it's a really interesting one, especially with them gaining their dream powers that allows them to better fight Freddy. It's definitely one that I enjoy, and it really is. It's got a great soundtrack too. Like the Dream Warrior song is an amazing song, so it's good. I like this one. So we've got three Friday the 13th movies in, and one falls into each category. Um, so that's doing pretty good. We're doing pretty good for Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street. This is a Nightmare on Elm Street. I am talking about a Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. So this one starts off by killing all of the survivors of the previous one, and there are multiple. No, they've done it before. Plenty of horror movies have done it where you kill off all of your survivors from the previous movie in the next one. It's not that many. It's normally just like the main protagonist dies and the rest still get to live if they made it through. But this one's like, nope, we're killing them all. They're all dead. Three people, three dead bodies. And that's because Freddy kills the rest of the Elm Street children, but he is then passed on from I can't think of the character's name. It's Patricia Arquette's character in the third one, who is not played by Patricia Arquette in the fourth one. Her power is to drag people into her dreams, and she drags the new protagonist into her dream, and that allows Freddy to not terrorize the children of Elm Street and move on to just basically kill whoever he wants. And that's how this movie is set up. It's Freddy killing whoever he wants and going out and them trying to again stop Freddy, figure out how to kill him, and you get a little more of the backstory of him being the son of 1,000 psychopaths, which is brought up in 3 as well, and how he came to be alive. And you get more of that because this next group of films from 3 all the way to Freddy's Dead are kind of all connected through that idea that it does a lot to do Freddy's backstory throughout these films. But yeah, the Dream Master, it's not bad. You get some good moments in it. It's nothing super memorable is hitting my head though, which might be a sign, but overall, it's a pretty average Nightmare on Elm Street film. It's not great. It's not horrible. Some people say it's horrible, but it's average. That brings us to Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. Our protagonist from 4 is now very pregnant, and Freddy's invading the child's dreams, which means he can attack anyone, anywhere that he wants. And, the protagonist this protagonist can gain the power of other people in dreams. That's what happens in 4. But anyways, we now have Freddy being able to get to people through this baby's dreams. And first off, it kills the father. Bam! Right off. That's the first kill of this movie. Is the male protagonist from the previous film. He is now dead. The female protagonist continues because Freddy can't kill her. He kills her. The baby dies, and he loses his ability to get into people's dreams and to attack people. This movie takes place 1 year after the events of the previous movie, where our protagonist, her brother, and all of her friends are killed by Freddy. She made friends real quick because there's a new group of kids. That always bothers me when I'm watching this. It's like, oh yeah, we're old friends. No, you're not. You weren't in the last one. You were not there. You were not being attacked by Freddy. You didn't survive. You became friends after. Somehow you went, oh, this is the crazy chick that said she was being stalked by the razor-fingered man. Let's be friends. That's what it looks like. Um, that's how it always looks like, though, in these kind of movies, especially when they try to like do it 1 year later and they have to have more cannon fodder for the killer to kill. It's like, how did they make these friends so quick? Is it just me? Am I bad at making friends? Probably. That's probably the truth. That I couldn't make friends. That if all of my friends died, I would not have a new crop of friends 12 months later. Um, but yeah, they end up using Freddy's mom to help rid the child and rid Freddy of his spirit and defeat Freddy. What they hope for is once and for all for the main character it is because they do not show back up in other Nightmare movies, though they do show up in a comic book crossing over Freddy Jason and Ash Williams. They do show up in that. But that is not a movie, so we're not talking about that. Plus, I've actually never physically read the second installment of Freddy vs. Jason vs. Ash because I don't know why. I liked the first one. I don't know why I never read the second one. But that's a story for a different day. Shark Time! Where does it fall? It's another average Friday Nightmare on Elm Street film. It's another average Nightmare on Elm Street film. It's not horrible. It's not awesome. It's a fine Freddy movie. It's got its problems, but it's pretty decent. That brings us to Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare. Apparently, Freddy has grown. They never explain how Freddy comes back. Like after being defeated in the previous film, they just kind of ignore. I'm not even sure how many of the films they ignore. Like I think they don't want to ignore them, but at the same time, they're definitely ignoring them. Um, so Freddy is basically Springwood, the town where Freddy kills. He has full control, and there are no children left in Springwood except one kid who finally escapes. He goes to a halfway house where the counselor decides to bring him back to Springwood to figure out who he is because he doesn't remember who he is and where his parents are, and all that junk. 3 other kids stow away, and they end up getting trapped in Springwood. And Freddy begins to slash the children, as it's led to found out that before Freddy became Freddy, he had a child, he had an abusive father, he had a daughter, and that the counselor actually is the daughter, though the kid. With the amnesia, first thinks he's Freddy's son until Freddy offs him. There's some cool kills in this one because this is where you get the video game kill where he's got like the power glove and trying. It's campy, it's weird, but it's a lot of fun. Also, you get the big. There's a deaf kid who has hearing aids, and he uses them to blow the kid's head off with sound. Again, really weird, really campy, but it's a lot of fun. This has a weird ending because Freddy gets blown up, and part of this movie was in 3D, um, because that was the era this movie was made in. Overall, let's go to the chart. I put Freddy's Dead. I put it as a good movie. I like Freddy's Dead. I don't care what people say. It's an enjoyable film. I get excited when I'm watching the Nightmare on Elm Street movies. I keep screwing that up. I get excited when I'm watching a Nightmare on Elm Street films and I get to Freddy's Dead and I'm just like really happy. I really want to watch Freddy's Dead because I really enjoy this movie. I think it's very well done. It's not a great movie by any means, but it's fun. It is so much fun. That brings us to Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Wes Craven came back to make a new uh, Freddy Krueger movie. It doesn't even take place in the continuity of the other movies because it takes place in the continuity of reality. Because the actress who plays Nancy Thompson is in this movie, not playing Nancy, but playing her actual character, as is the actor who plays her father, Robert Englund, plays both Freddy and Robert Englund. I think Wes Craven plays himself. Johnny Depp makes an appearance, which is weird because Johnny Depp is in 3 of these movies. He's in the first one, he's in Freddy's Dead as a cameo, and he's in this one as a cameo, which I think him and the actress who plays Nancy Thompson are tied. I think they're both in the exact same amount of films. I think they're all both in 3, and then of course Robert Englund's in all of them but one. But basically, it's found out that Freddy Krueger is an actual demon that Wes Craven was trying to trap in the movies, and now that the movies are done, the series is over. It is coming into the real world, but it still has the guise of Freddy. Freddy is just a creation, a character of Wes Craven, but this demon is still taking Freddy's form and is trying to accomplish what Freddy couldn't, which is kill Nancy. And as this movie progresses, the various actors start to regress into their actual characters. So Nancy and her dad start having a father-daughter relationship. This is one, it grew on me. I had to watch it a couple of times at a couple of different ages in my life. Because when I watched it for the first time when it was new, I didn't like it. I didn't like this movie. And then I've rewatched it in my late 20s, early 30s, and I enjoyed it a lot more than the first couple of times. Because I also watched it at some point in my early 20s. But I enjoyed it a lot more every time I watch it. It's one of those. It's one of those. It has to grow on you. But it is a fun movie. I do like Wes Craven's New Nightmare. In fact, I put it in average. That one in the original probably, if I made more categories, they would lean more towards the good side of average. Or yeah, they'd lean more towards good than average. So right now, without even talking about the last 2 movies, it's kind of clear how this ranking is. I'd go 3 Freddy's Dead. You know what? I'll cover that at the end. I can see it. I don't need a screen. I can just look at this and I know what I'm doing. So now the movie I forgot to put on here because I just forgot. I don't know why I forgot this one because I love this movie so much. But you can't find it in any Nightmare on Elm Street box set. It's just not there. But it is Freddy vs. Jason. I don't have Freddy vs. Jason on the chart. I just forgot about it. But luckily, I remembered when I was putting this together to make sure Freddy vs. Jason got talked about. So this is the crossover movie that everyone was waiting for. It was supposed to happen in the 80s. They were originally trying to do it when Nightmare uh, 8, when Nightmare 8 was being made. It was supposed to be the Freddy vs. Jason crossover, but they couldn't come to a deal. New Line the owners of Freddy bought Jason, and they did this crossover. I like this movie. I think this is a very good movie. They do a great job, though, because of the fact they don't have as much Jason material to use for flashbacks, because they don't have all of the Friday the 13th material. They only have Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X, the movies they produced. Um, they rely way too heavily on Freddy to the point where they don't even use any material. Like, they don't try to recreate anything for Jason. They don't try, because they could have recreated some of that stuff and gotten away with it, but they didn't. But they used a lot of Freddy clips, and it's a very Freddy heavy film because one, Freddy talks, Jason doesn't, and two, Freddy is the original New Line slasher. The fact that this didn't have Freddy win is both good and bad. You'd expect it after watching this movie that Freddy's going to end up being the winner, just because he's clearly, New Line is leaning very heavily on their property, not the property they bought from Paramount. But at the same time, Jason is the bigger of the two as far as sales and just longevity at that point. That yeah, that it made sense that it's a tie. Um, and it made sense that they couldn't just let Freddy win out over his competition. And that's the thing, because like Jason X came out just a few years before this one. Wes Craven's New Nightmare came out in the mid '90s, I think. I think it's like somewhere between '95 and '97. So, it's a decade later, and there hasn't been another Freddy Krueger movie. So yeah, Jason had more longevity than Freddy did. But I love Freddy versus Jason. If I had it charted, it would be in the good spot. It would be on the good side because I love this movie. It is a great movie. I love Freddy versus Jason. So that brings us to the last movie, which is A Nightmare on Elm Street, the remake. It sucks. It's just bad. I watched it and I thought it was interesting, and then it kept going, and I got less interested the more I watched. Like, because they embrace that Freddy was a child rapist and murderer, where in the original it's hinted at that he was a rapist, like it's applied that he was a rapist, but it's never straight out said. He's just a child murderer. Um, so I like that they leaned on that, but then it just like they're trying to make it so Freddy's not a villain, or you're not supposed to think that Freddy's not the villain that they made him out to be. Maybe he was wrongfully accused, yada yada yada. And in the end, it's just not interesting. It's not an interesting movie. It's bad. The New Nightmare on Elm Street is bad. So let's rank these movies now. Like I said, I don't have a final graphic for the rankings. I'm just gonna rank them. Freddy vs. Jason is top. I love that movie. Nightmare 3, followed by Freddy vs. Jason, followed Freddy's Dead. I don't want to put Freddy vs. Jason on here twice. Maybe I do. Followed by Freddy's Dead in the bronze. Then Nightmare on Elm Street, the original, takes fourth place. Fifth place would be Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Sixth place would be Part 4, The Dream Master. Seventh place would be Part 5, The Dream Child. Eighth place would be Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, and last place would be Nightmare on Elm Street Remake. That is how I would rank these Nightmare on Elm Street movies. But that's just me. That's just me personally. Like I said, it's not my favorite horror franchise. I can enjoy it. I get why people like it. I have no problem with any of that. It's just not for me. Um, but yeah, so this has been an episode of Rank the Movies. Like I said, we did a slightly different format so I could use images in a different way than trying to use the projector or superimpose them in later. Let me know what you thought in the comments below. We got some more franchises. Next week, I move on to one of my favorite directors and the universe they created in the franchise of films. So I'll be talking about that next week. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you don't miss any content from Rank the Movies. I will see you next time. Have a good one.